Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Corn Board.
When we transform Nebraska corn into ethanol, it doesn't disappear from the food supply. It just takes a little detour. Ethanol is made from the starch. The rest of the corn becomes livestock feed to create meat and dairy products, corn oil, sweetener, and other food ingredients, and maybe a little carbon dioxide to make your soft drinks fizzy. Homegrown ethanol helps satisfy America's hunger for energy and the world's appetite for feed and food. Nebraska's family corn farmers, sustaining innovation.
Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine, and major funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Corn Board.
Welcome to this week's edition of Market Journal. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. On this episode, Roy Smith tracks the dead cat bounce. Galen Erickson talks about using implants in the feedlot. Nathan Mueller discusses precision technologies for crop production. And Brad Lubben gives an update on ag policy issues. Roy Smith is our corn and soybean market analyst this week. The U.S. Department of Agriculture's December crop report made no changes to American use or supply for corn or soybeans. It did, however, increase corn production in Brazil to 86.5 million metric tons. That would be a record for the country. Final export numbers for October illustrated the strength in foreign demand, showing U.S. corn shipments up more than 53% from a year ago, and soybean exports nearly 13% above October 2015. When we last talked with Roy at the beginning of November, he was tracking his dead cat bounce move in the soybean market. We started by asking for an update when we met again Wednesday afternoon.
Well, it's been an interesting fall for sure. The dead cat bounce, as I know it, started a little early. It started around the 15th of September, and up until just a couple days ago, it was pretty much going right along the way we expected it to. A few days up, a few days down, but the general trend has been higher, going all the way back to what I said earlier. So now, is it going to keep going? One of the rules that we have with this dead cat bounce is that we don't usually see it lasting past the 31st of December. That doesn't mean it can't, or occasionally will, but long-term average is probably not.
How much price differential was there in that bounce?
Well, at the absolute extreme, it was about $1.25 for soybeans, and it's kind of hard to say because the thing floated along for weeks and didn't go anywhere. Up a little, down a little, up a little, down a little, but didn't really go anywhere. And then all at once we got a big jump, and we went from 35 or 40 cents a bushel appreciation to well over $1. And then this last week or so, it's been kind of hanging right in there at about $1, $1.25. So, the question is, where does it go from here? And historically, it's just really hard to nail it down because we had so much move all at once that it almost seems like it should just shoot right on higher, and maybe it will, I don't know. But, it's kind of a coin toss from the 1st of January on into the spring. It's kind of a coin toss. We used to call that the John Deere low price move. It isn't that much of a move anymore, but it's still there.
If you missed a window for selling there, what is your philosophy on trying to get rid of beans?
Well, first of all, I guess just from a flat-out price standpoint, I say $9 cash at the farm. It would be a good price to be moving some more of those beans that you missed the first time around. If you really are willing to take the risk, if you look at that long-term seasonal price chart, we had a low clear back there in September, and then just gradually eating its way higher. And the odds this last 4 or 5 years have been that rally will keep going. Now, I always cross my fingers when I say that because it can go down just as fast or faster than it goes up.
The last time we talked, you were going to wait until the first of the year to start to think about what to do with corn. Has that philosophy changed at all?
Philosophy hasn't changed. The bin behind you is full of corn and have fans, and the fans run occasionally. I try to just be sure that there's always some air movement to keep the corn in condition, and we'll take a good hard look at it again after the first of the year. And you know, I call it the drop dead date, but it's not exactly true for corn, but the principle is still there.
Is basis helping at all right now? You had mentioned a cash level at soybeans. I guess I should have asked for soybeans, and now we can go into corn as well.
Well, the basis has improved a little bit, but you know, you came down here from Lincoln, and I'm sure you drove by some piles of corn. And until those piles of corn get cleaned up, the basis isn't going to move very much because the elevators have to do something. Fortunately, we didn't get the hard driving rain like we did a year ago, so everything got rotten. But they're still going to be moving that corn as quick as they can.
So much of the daily market commentary now focuses on what's happening with South America at the beginning of its growing season. Over the past few years, has it had more of an impact on what we're seeing?
You know, that whole issue of the South American crop is kind of strange. It's kind of hard to figure because if you look at when the South American crop has been a big factor in the soybean market, it hasn't caused the price to go down like you would think it would. I mean, logic would say if you have a big crop, the price is going to go down. And that does happen sometimes, but more often than not, in the spring, we look at that long-term chart and it just gradually eats its way higher, even in the face of beans coming from South America. So it's an interesting concept. Don't get oversold on it.
Next week, Luke Beckman from Central Valley Ag will join us to look at corn and soybean markets. The 2017 Nebraska Beef Cattle Report compiles research yearly from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln on subjects such as cow-calf management, using residues in forages, and growing and finishing animals. One of the topics this year looks at the use of implant programs in the feedlot. Placed under the skin and the ear, implants can help producers add weight to cattle. UNL's study looked at the timing and strength of implants to aid in efficiency. We recently talked with Nebraska Extension's Galen Erickson in the RB Warren Arena on UNL's East Campus about that research and began by asking about the use of implants in feedlot systems.
About 96% of our cattle, by the time they're finished anyway, have been implanted. Most of the implant use in the U.S. industry and the beef industry is in the feedlot sector. There's some more opportunity if producers wanted to in the backgrounding and cow-calf sector to use more implants, but heavy use is primarily focused in the feedlot finishing sector.
Can you address what you see as some of the bigger consumer concerns about the use of implants?
Yeah, you know, it seems like there's more and more interest in production practices, and we have programs in place, some branded programs that are called all natural, which normally restricts the use of exogenous growth implants. And then you have non-hormone treated cattle program, which allows for export to the European Union. So there's some programs that are restricting the use, and some consumers within our general population at least perceive that that's safer for them. You know, to be honest, the data don't suggest that there's any difference in the meat quality or any difference in meat safety. There is a small increase in hormone concentration, but that's been measured routinely, and frankly, it's minuscule. So when asked, there's a lot of questions and debate, and my take is that if consumers want that choice, we should provide it, but it's going to cost more.
Because they're so efficient now?
Well, yeah, there is no other technology that we use, frankly, that gives a greater rate of return. We're going to invest $3 to $5 per head and frankly increase the final weights of those cattle by 80 to 100 pounds. So if live price on cattle is $1 a pound, I can do the math easily. You get $80 to $100 more for a $3 to $5 investment. That's a pretty good rate of return. So my biggest concern is always not what producers choose to do, but if they choose to go to a program that restricts use to implants, just to be sure the premium offsets their lack of revenue that they would have received.
Tell me about some of the research you're doing with implants and the timing of those implants.
Yeah, there is so many options that at times I think it can be confusing to operators. And so one of the more recent trends has been is if a little bit's good, more's better. And for cattle that are going to be fed for a couple hundred days, these implants, most of them, all except for one that's on the market, last about 120 days. And so once you feed cattle in a finishing system for more than 120 days, you got to decide, do I re-implant them? How do I do that? So some of our more current work has been focused on how aggressive, in other words, how strong of an implant to use. And if a strong one's really great at the end, which is true, a strong one at the beginning might be good too, followed by a strong one at the end. And so that's what we've been working on. And it actually is interesting because it shows that more isn't necessarily better. So my recommendation is use the strongest implants for the last 100 to 120 days. And then you can choose to use a weaker one up front. Don't go with another strong one at the very beginning because you don't get improvement in performance. And so there's really no extra benefit.
You are still talking about using 2 implants though.
Yeah, I think that the data are clear, and we've been exploring that too, that it's probably good to give them a weaker combination, what they call implant up front, which has estrogen and TBA. You can choose to give them nothing up front. Just make sure they all, if you're going to be in an implant program, that they get the strongest implant at the end, which is usually a fairly strong combination of estrogen and TBA.
On the Market Journal website, we'll link to the 2017 Nebraska Beef Cattle Report and the study on using implants in the feedlot. Nebraska Extension and UNL's Department of Agronomy and Horticulture will hold a 2-day event in January focused heavily on corn and soybean production research. The Nebraska Crop Management Conference is new for 2017 and in Kearney on the 19th and 20th. Speakers include Extension personnel and outside experts, including Purdue Extension's Bob Nielsen. Nebraska Extension educator Nathan Mueller will discuss emerging and established ag technologies at the conference. We talked with Nathan earlier this week about that subject.
The topic's going to be, utilizing your yield maps, and there's some additional things you're going to want to do with that. So, how do you make sure that you have good data, good quality data, and then how do you utilize that information to drive management decisions? Now we're looking at, you calibrate your yield monitor, you get these yield maps, and the next thing is what do you do with them? And so it's really first important, great, you calibrated your yield monitor. I think most growers are used to doing that. The next step is cleaning the yield data. Just because it's calibrated doesn't mean that there's not bad data points yet in there. And if you're going to use that yield map to make management decisions, let's say nitrogen rate, you want to make sure that you're getting the actual yield for this part of the field. And if you have some high or low splits, it might bring it down. So it's really important, and there's some software that we have available to us that both your ag advisor, your crop advisor, or yourself can use to clean up that data after the fact, after the harvest is over.
If you don't clean it up, how off could it be?
Yeah, you could easily probably be 5-10 bushels off on corn, 3 to 4 or 5 bushels off for the field average for soybeans just by cleaning yield data versus not. The other thing is adjusting for moisture, especially in soybeans. That's less of a problem this year with higher moisture soybeans. But if you have 8% moisture beans in some part of the field and 13% in the other, it's showing a yield difference. It doesn't, most of the software doesn't add that moisture back up. But if you're wanting to look at spatial pattern, not just moisture pattern, you really need to add that water weight back. And this yield editor that was created by USDA ARS can do that. So it's not only cleaning data, but you can actually improve some of the data quality by standardizing moisture.
I think if we were talking a few years ago, you would look at drones and they'd be a lot more popular with the margins that producers experienced then. Where we are now in the current financial environment, are there still precision ag technologies that you think are winners and can add value to the farm?
Yeah, I think that's why I wanted to focus on this topic of utilizing your yield data. You already have it. You've already paid for it, right? And you already get a printed map, but digital data is really important because a paper copy, you can learn something from that, but doing some additional data analysis with your yield data on a computer is really important. So you can look at yield by hybrid, you can look at yield by soil type, you can look at yield by management zone if you've created management zones. And so all of that is trying to fine-tune using that yield data to drive management decisions. So what I'm going to talk about is understanding, not just cleaning your data, and step 2 is understanding the variation within the field. Why is this spot low yielding? Why is this spot high yielding? What are some additional data layers we need to help us understand that map? It might be soil texture, soil EC. It might be using multi-year yield analysis to look at, is there a repeated pattern in the field? And then it might be taking a soil sample in this spot versus this spot to figure out what's going on to finish that picture. And then the other part I'm going to talk about is using historical images from here on campus that are archived. I've pulled aerial images that are back to the 1940s and 30s for my fields and some of our family's farms to look at, oh, that's why this is still showing up. This used to be an old cattle yard or a place 100 years ago. And if you're renting that farm the last 10 years, you don't have that family history to go with that. So I think it's really important to use historical imagery to maybe explain some things going on in yield maps that you don't get from other data layers. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how you can get that, how you can bring it in, and some things I've found through using it.
You can find an agenda for the Nebraska Crop Management Conference through a link on the Market Journal website. There is a registration fee associated with the event. Early registration discounts are available through January 15th. Additionally, you can find more information from Nathan on his website at croptechcafe.org. On January 2nd, the Environmental Protection Agency will implement what it deems major changes to its Worker Protection Standard, or WPS. The EPA says the WPS aims to reduce the risk of pesticide poisoning and injury among agricultural workers and pesticide handlers. The agency made revisions to aspects of the Worker Protection Standard, such as mandatory training intervals, age requirements, and application exclusion zones. Nebraska Extension's Clyde Ogg explains what producers will need to know about the WPS.
The Worker Protection Standard is kind of a regulation that affects agricultural products when they're used to produce an agricultural commodity. And they help protect workers, as defined under that regulation would be anyone that was working in the area that was treated or could be potentially treated. Could include detasselers, it could include irrigation repairmen, utility workers, anyone that might go in that area. It protects those people, and it protects the pesticide applicator through restricted entry intervals, or REIs, which are the period of time after pesticide is applied until you can enter that treated area. The other way it protects these folks is through PPE, or personal protective equipment, and there's a range of regulations about that, including who supplies those PPE. The best advice I could give at this stage is, if you were required to do training before under the older regulation, then you should pay close attention here. Rather than doing the training every 5 years, you do it every year. You also have to train those workers before they start their job, rather than having a lag-in period of time. Most farmers and ranchers know that their immediate family are exempted. Well, they've expanded that to include first cousins, aunts and uncles, grandparents, a much broader list of people.
You can find more information about the EPA's changes to the Worker Protection Standard through a link on the Market Journal website. The December Nebraska Farmer says water is the key to agriculture, especially if you're farming and ranching in the northern Nebraska Panhandle. This month's magazine says with an annual mean precipitation at about 15 inches per year, water is monitored closely within the Upper Niobrara White Natural Resources District. The entire NRD has been designated as a groundwater management area since 1990. Today, nearly 250,000 acres within the district are irrigating a wide range of crops. You can read more about how the NRD is monitoring weekly water use in the December Nebraska Farmer. In Washington, D.C. on January 20th, President-elect Donald Trump is to become the 45th President of the United States. At the time of this taping, the President-elect hasn't announced his nomination to lead the Department of Agriculture, but he has indicated where he'll go on certain issues such as trade, which we've discussed previously on Market Journal. Wednesday morning, we talked with Nebraska Extension Policy Specialist Brad Lubben to learn how the new administration could impact agriculture.
Well, actually, right now, the outlook for ag is still quite fuzzy. We don't have a Secretary of Ag designate yet. Maybe we'll have one before Christmas, but right now we don't have one, and with the current revolving door of candidates, it's even becoming less certain who the likely next Secretary will be.
What do you think the big issues are for agriculture now? Certainly we heard
Right.
some during the campaign, but what do you think they realistically are?
Well, and even beyond just the next secretary, it's the issues that are on the horizon next year. The 2018 Farm Bill is upon us. It will be time to start that debate. You know that the committees in Congress will initiate that debate. The new secretary should have a say. But there are big issues about budget and spending priorities and even some program reforms in the 18 Farm Bill. But then there is this whole host of other issues: trade, regulations, taxes, immigration, healthcare. A big plate of issues, some of which won't be debated necessarily within ag circles, but certainly that have impacts on our ag communities.
We've talked a lot about trade on this show before. Tell me about the regulations that you think were pointed to for potential rollbacks.
Right. Well, if I first sort of make the comparison, we talk about trade and the concerns that ag has about both candidates had backed away from trade, and the president-elect has talked about pulling out of agreements. That's certainly a concern on the demand side of the equation for ag. Yet the optimism on the regulatory side is that rolling back regulations can help us on the cost side. So some offset if both of those would come to pass. On the regulatory side, the big elephant in the room, so to speak, is WOTUS, the Waters of the United States rule. And the promises that a new administration, new Congress would roll back that proposed WOTUS rule, with the caveat that you can't just withdraw it and have nothing. You still have this sort of confused Supreme Court set of rulings about what is and what isn't covered, and thus the reason for a rule to define exactly which waters are covered and which aren't. Obviously, the new administration may not go as far as what the previous administration proposed, but something likely still has to be done in that area. Look at air quality regulations, look at biotechnology regulation, on food labeling, on down the list. There's a lot of regulatory area there for potential relief.
Short term or long term, do you think it's realistic that immigration is addressed and health care as well?
Those are two issues, where ag won't necessarily dominate the conversation, but the impacts on ag are tremendous. It's impossible to imagine an agricultural sector, both in the production and processing side, without an immigrant workforce. So some workable reform has to be achieved. Can that be a combination of border security and legal immigration? It remains to be seen whether the new administration, the new Congress can actually get a workable package together. Healthcare in much the same boat. With all the push against the current federal healthcare legislation and rules, yet there's a need for something. It's not just repeal and eliminate. It would have to be repeal and replace. And if that's the case, the challenge is on figuring out how to replace it.
Who more dictates ag policy in Washington? Is it the president and the White House, or is it the Congress?
Well, fundamentally, we can say that the secretary always tries to have a voice, and some are better than others and have been more successful than others in contributing to the discussion. But it's a voice, and it's one of many voices that are heard in the halls of Congress and in the committee rooms. So look to Congress for leadership in terms of actually developing what the next bill looks like. Look to the administration for some guidance and preference on what they hope it looks like.
Now, with this week's weather forecast, here's Nebraska Extension ag climatologist Al Dutcher.
Well, folks, here we again for the weekly forecast. The big news during this last week, of course, was for the better part of the period, colder than normal conditions. In fact, sub-zero lows were reported extensively in the Panhandle and portions of north central Nebraska several days this week. Lots of single-digit lows, highs that weren't making it past the mid-20s during the middle of the week with some high winds. So it felt very uncomfortable. Yes, we did get a break here and there in a day where we might get up around the freezing mark, but overall a very cold pattern. And then, of course, we had our little weather maker move across the northern plains that dropped some significant snowfall across the Dakotas and skirted northern Nebraska. Now that system is starting to push to the east of us, and we would expect the precipitation will start to tail off. There is still a chance across the eastern half of the state to get some moisture, but overall it looks like the major impacts from this storm system will move to our east, and there are increasing signs that we will at least see a respite from some of these bitterly cold temperatures, but we're going to have to wait till we get into late Sunday and into Monday before the warmer air moves into our region and it has the potential to at least see the 40-degree mark several times next week. So let's take a look at the upper air models and see what we have in place. First thing I'll draw your attention to is we have a large jet, northern jet, bringing the storm system to our east, strengthening it with the big winds, basically causing the system to strengthen, and it's moving out to the northeast. On the backside, we're seeing the cold air that'll be moving in, and we are looking for some very cold temperatures during the morning. And we start to see some ridging pattern taking place as that trough moves to the east of us. We start to get into some warmer air as another system comes into the western United States. So we'll be looking at some very nice conditions during the middle of the week. Don't look like we're going to see much in the way of significant moisture. And then we start to see the system dig out. And this first system is going to eject out and just skirt southeast Nebraska, move up into the Great Lakes region. Looks like we're going to be mainly precipitation free. Thursday we get a break. Pretty much mild temperatures. We're looking a little bit above normal. And then the second trough digs out. This is the one we need to watch. And the current models are indicating that at this point in time, this will just barely miss southeastern Nebraska with snowfall, any northward drift, and we're going to see some accumulating snowfall Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. And if this stays a little bit farther south, then we're looking at a brown Christmas for a substantial portion of southern Nebraska. In terms of precipitation, you can see that the vast majority of the snowfall associated with the system is across Iowa. This snowfall that we're depicting here is for 3 inches or above, so we could still see some slight light accumulations, but you'll notice that we're basically precipitation free for the middle of the week, and we see the storm system that comes on shore is going to take its time to move its way down toward the southern plains, and then it will eventually kick out. This is our midweek storm that will kick out rapidly toward the Ohio River Valley, and it's the second system as this starts to make its way on Friday. It starts to get organized in Texas as the one to watch, because this one actually is being lifted much farther toward the north. So you can start to see the input of the thunderstorm activity on the back side of it. We're not showing the snowfall, but remember, we're showing 3-inch totals. So when we look at the temperature forecast for next Thursday to the following Tuesday, the above normal temperatures start to take sway over the eastern half of the country, and we see that storm track with a precipitation line just to the south and east of Nebraska.
Thanks, Al. Today's interviews can be found individually on the Market Journal website and through the Market Journal mobile app. They include information on corn and soybean prices, using implants in the feedlot, precision technologies, and ag policy issues. As always, you can keep up with Market Journal during the week by following us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Next week, Luke Beckman will analyze corn and soybean markets, and Lauren Giesler will discuss results from the 2016 Soybean Management Field Days. Until then, thanks for watching. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. We'll see you next week.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine, and major funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Corn Board. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.